If the company you own goes under, you're last in line. Behind the bondholders, behind the preferred shareholders, behind everybody. The SEC states the order plainly, and that single ranking answers more equity questions on this exam than any other fact. And there's a very good reason a rational person buys the worst claim in the queue anyway, which is the thing most study guides never explain. This is Section 2. 33 of your 75 scored items live here, which is more than Sections 1 and 4 combined, and equity is where it starts.
Chris here, and the foundation is one sentence. Stocks are a type of security that gives stockholders a share of ownership in a company.
Emma here. Ownership, not a loan. That's the whole difference from a bond, and it drives everything that follows.
Because an owner isn't owed anything. A lender is owed. That distinction decides who gets paid when there's not enough to go round.
And the SEC spells out what common stock actually gets you. Common stock entitles owners to vote at shareholder meetings and receive dividends.
2 rights, a vote and a dividend if one is declared. Note the if, because nothing obliges a company to declare one.
Now the Q, which is the part to get exactly right. In a liquidation, the SEC says the company's bondholders will be paid first, then holders of preferred stock.
And it's worth being precise about what a dividend actually is, because the word gets used loosely. It's a distribution a company chooses to make out of its profits. The board declares it. Nobody can compel it. Missing one isn't a default, and a company can pay a dividend for 20 years and stop next quarter without breaching anything.
And common stockholders are the last in line to share in the proceeds. Their words, not ours.
Which in a real bankruptcy usually means nothing at all reaches them. Last in line is often the same as empty-handed.
And there's a second right common shareholders have that's easy to overlook. They can inspect certain corporate books and records, and they receive the annual report. Ownership carries information rights as well as a vote, which is part of why the disclosure regime from Section 1 exists at all.
So bonds, then preferred, then common. That order is worth more marks than anything else in this episode.
Which raises the obvious question, and I want to ask it properly rather than skate past it.
Which is the cleanest way to see the difference from debt. A missed bond payment is a default with legal consequences that can put a company into bankruptcy. A missed dividend is a disappointment. Same company, same cash shortage, 2 completely different outcomes, and the reason is which claim you hold.
Why would anyone buy the claim that gets paid last?
Let me pause for just a second because this genuinely helps. If you are getting value here, hit that like button, then subscribe and ring the bell. It costs you nothing, and it is the single biggest thing that keeps these videos coming. Chris asked why anybody buys the claim that gets paid last, and it's the right question because the answer is the whole logic of equity.
It needs someone who works on how these claims are actually structured.
Professor Okafor studies how corporate claims rank against each other and picked out Chris's question before we started.
Chris is describing only the downside of the position, which is where every explanation of this goes wrong. A bondholder has a fixed claim. They're owed a specific amount, and they will never be owed more than that, however well the company does.
So their best case is being paid exactly what they were promised.
Their best case is getting their money back with the agreed interest. That's the ceiling. The common stockholder has no such ceiling because the common stockholder owns what's left after everybody with a fixed claim has been satisfied.
And what's left can be enormous.
Or nothing. Those are the same position viewed from 2 ends. Being last in the queue when things go badly and being first to benefit when they go well aren't 2 facts about equity. They're 1 fact.
So the ranking isn't a design flaw somebody failed to notice.
It's the price of the upside, and it's priced deliberately. If common stock were paid before bondholders, it wouldn't be equity at all, and nobody would lend to companies on those terms.
That reframes it completely. I had it filed as a warning rather than a trade.
It's a trade, and the exam tests whether you understand it as one. A question asking which security carries the greatest potential return and the greatest risk of total loss is asking about the same characteristic twice.
And that logic explains something people find odd about real markets. A company can be in serious trouble and its bonds can trade calmly while its shares collapse. The bondholders are still expecting to be repaid, The shareholders are watching the thing they own get consumed by claims that rank ahead of them. Is there a limit to how far that reasoning goes?
There's, and it's worth saying, more risk doesn't reliably produce more return in the real world. It produces a wider range of outcomes. The exams model is a clean version of a genuinely messy relationship, and you should answer the clean version without believing it fully.
Professor Okafor, thank you. Last in line and first in growth being one fact rather than two is the framing I'd want carried.
Chris asked why anyone would accept the worst deal, which was exactly the right way in. It's not the worst deal, it's the other deal.
Preferred stock is the middle seat, and the exam loves it precisely because it sits between the two things people already understand.
And the SEC's description gives you both halves of the trade in one sentence.
Preferred stockholders usually don't have voting rights, but they receive dividend payments before common stockholders do.
So you give up the vote. That's what you pay.
And what you get is priority on the dividend. Preferred means preferred in payment, not preferred in quality or preferred as in better.
Which is worth saying twice, because the name genuinely misleads people. Nothing about preferred stock is inherently superior. It's a different position in a queue.
And there's a reason a company issues preferred at all rather than simply borrowing, which makes the product make sense. Preferred is equity on the balance sheet, so it doesn't add to the debt a lender would look at, and skipping its dividend isn't a default. It raises money with some of the flexibility of ownership and some of the fixed feel of debt, and the same priority carries into a liquidation. Bondholders first, then preferred, then common.
So preferred beats common in both queues. The dividend queue and the liquidation queue. There's one more feature worth knowing because it shows up constantly. Many preferred issues are cumulative, meaning any dividend the company skips accumulates and must be paid in full before common shareholders receive anything at all. The priority isn't just about this quarter, it reaches backwards.
So is preferred stock just the better stock then? That's how the name reads, and it's worth answering directly because a question will lean on the assumption, but loses to bondholders in both, which is the half people forget when they hear the word preferred.
And because the dividend is typically fixed, preferred behaves more like a bond than like common stock when interest rates move.
Which is the seesaw from episode 13 showing up in a product. A fixed payment loses appeal when new issues pay more, so its price falls.
So preferred is an equity that answers to bond logic.
Which is exactly why it gets tested. It's the one product where a candidate has to hold two frameworks at once.
Rights and warrants are the pair people mix up most in this whole section, and the fix is to stop learning them as definitions and start learning them as answers to two different problems.
And both problems come from the same place, which is that a company issuing new shares dilutes the people who already own it.
Professor Okafor is back with us for this.
Start with dilution, because rights exist to solve it. If you own 1% of a company and it doubles its share count, you now own 0.5% without having sold anything. Your ownership was reduced by an action you didn't take.
So a rights offering lets existing holders keep their share.
It gives existing shareholders the opportunity to buy the new shares first, typically at a price below the current market, and typically over a short window. Short-lived, priced attractively, and aimed at the people already there.
And dilution is worth a concrete number rather than a principle because the abstraction hides how fast it bites. If a company with 100 million shares issues another 100 million, every existing holder now owns half of what they owned that morning. Nothing was taken from them, and nothing was sold, and their stake halved.
And a warrant isn't that.
A warrant is a long-dated right to buy shares at a set price, usually above the market price when it's issued. It's not defensive, it's a sweetener, most often attached to a bond or a preferred issue to make that security easier to sell.
So the tells are the time and the price.
Exactly those two. Short life and a price below market points to a right. Long life and a price above market points to a warrant. And if a question mentions it came attached to a bond, that settles it before you've thought about anything else.
And the thing they share?
Both create new shares when exercised, which means both eventually dilute somebody. A right lets you protect yourself from that. A warrant is a claim on it. Same underlying mechanic, opposite purposes.
And it's worth naming who each instrument is really for, because that makes the pair stop blurring. A right is aimed at somebody who already owns the company and doesn't want their stake shrinking. A warrant is aimed at somebody being persuaded to buy something else entirely. Different audiences, which is why they have different terms. Is there an honest caution about learning them this way?
Only that the typicals are typical rather than universal. A warrant can be issued below market, and a right can run longer than usual. If a question gives you the actual terms, read them and ignore the rule of thumb. The heuristic is for when the question doesn't tell you.
Professor Okafor, thank you. Time and price as the two tells is the cleanest version of that I've heard. So what's the routine for an equity question? Because 33 items is too many to answer one at a time from memory.
One question first. Where does this security sit in the queue? Bonds, then preferred, then common, and almost every priority item falls out of that ordering.
Then, does it vote? Common does. Preferred usually doesn't. That trade of control for priority is the whole design of preferred stock, and one habit worth carrying into every product in this section. Not just equity. When a question describes a security you don't immediately recognize, ask what it's owed and what it's entitled to. Almost every product on this exam is some combination of a fixed claim and an ownership claim, and naming which parts it has usually gets you there.
Third, is the payment fixed? If it's expect the security to behave like a bond when rates move, whatever it's called.
And for rights versus warrants, check the life and the strike. Short and cheap is a right. Long and dear is a warrant.
There's a fair objection to running it as a routine like that, though.
Make it, because I'd rather you did than have somebody discover it themselves in the exam room.
Section 2 is 33 items across a lot of products, and 4 questions won't carry all of them. Options, funds, and municipal bonds each have mechanics that no general routine reaches. If someone leaves here thinking equity was the hard part, they're in for a shock.
That's fair. Equity is the friendliest corner of this section. And a last word on why this section is worth the hours. 33 items is nearly half the exam. And unlike Section 1, it's mostly mechanics rather than names. Mechanics reward practice questions far more than rereading does. So from here on, the drills matter more than the watching.
So take the routine as a starting frame rather than a system. It genuinely does answer most equity items, and it won't survive contact with options, which we will get to properly. Next time we start debt. Par, coupon, yield, and the seesaw between a bond's price and interest rates, which is the single most reused relationship on this exam. If one thing survives today, make it the queue. Bondholders, then preferred, then common, and the reason common sits at the end is the same reason it has no ceiling.
Last in line, first in growth. One fact.
If you're working toward this exam, subscribing keeps the course arriving in order, and the free practice sets on the site now cover the equity items. So before you go, tell me, had you ever been told why common stock sits at the back of the queue? Go and drill the ordering. This is Professor Erica, and I will see you in episode 21.